Terry Kath's origin story is just Midwest enough to cause joint pain. Born in Chicago 1946 on January 31st, because apparently February was already full of legends and his soul couldn't wait, his parents Ray and Evelyn Kath were the type of people who looked normal on the surface but casually played banjo and ran a lodge for fun, which is how serial killers or guitar heroes start depending on the tuning. They raised Terry in Norwood Park, which is basically the part of Chicago where you either become a mechanic or you bend space-time with a telly. Terry chose to flirt with both. Mom strummed a banjo, brother beat the drums, and Terry tried to do both until he realized that the banjo sounds like a fart trapped in a tin can, and the drums do not get you laid unless you're Keith Moon, which, spoiler alert, Terry was not. So what did he do? Well, he picked up the accordion, truly the sexiest of all instruments, because nothing screams rock star like squeezing a wheezing Italian lunchbox. But the man was persistent. He eventually got a guitar in 9th grade. He also got an amp, which was good, because even geniuses need to be loud when they're not invited to the talent show. Now, Terry's daughter, Michelle, later said that the parents loved entertaining at the lodge that they ran. So as a result, Terry was marinated in music pretty much from birth. Instead of burning effigies, they sang bar tunes and finger-picked bluegrass while slinging meatloaf. Terry Kath's teenage years, magical stretch of time from 1959 to 1965, when America was busy inventing nuclear anxiety, and Kath was busy inventing tones so filthy it should have required a permit. Picture this, a 14-year-old kid in 9th grade, dead-eyed from math class, suddenly clutching his first guitar and amp like it was the Ark of the Covenant, but louder. With that guitar, something clicked, not in a poetic way, more in the he just didn't want to suck anymore kind of way. So Terry started inhaling the ventures like there was some medicine for the broken soul. Then came the Jazz Cats, Johnny Smith, Howard Roberts, dudes who obviously sounded like they were wearing suits while they were soloing. Dick Dale showed up with the spring reverb-soaked thunderbolts, and suddenly Terry's brain was a blender full of sand, surf, and swing. And then you get George Benson and Kenny Burrell later on. You've got a pretty wicked cocktail of influence. Meanwhile, Terry's future bandmates in Chicago were out there doing things the right way. You know, taking lessons, reading sheet music, wearing matching socks. But Terry, nope, he was in the garage, stoned on tone, chasing down riffs obsessively, and very self-driven. He tried lessons once, but noped the hell out because some guy with a sweater vest tried to explain diminished sevenths. Terry wasn't wanting any of the theory. He wanted distortion that made the walls sweat. So instead he jammed, constantly, loudly, even shirtless at times. The man played like he had a grudge against silence. By the time the other kids were figuring out what deodorant was, Terry Kath was already melting amps, raising eyebrows, and setting the early groundwork for the kind of guitar playing that brought people to their knees. By 19, Terry Kath wasn't wasting time with prom, acne, or pretending to care about algebra. The man was already diving headfirst into the sweaty, debt-ridden hellmouth of semi-pro music. The first stop, the Mystics in 1963. And then came Jimmy Rice and the Gentlemen in 65, which sounds more like a band that did weddings and maybe one very confusing bar mitzvah. But the next one, Jimmy Ford and the Executives. Less of a band name and more of an HR disaster. You don't form a band called the Executives unless you plan to commit tax fraud with a backbeat. But Kath wasn't just playing bass here, he was leading. A 19-year-old with a guitar, a grudge, and zero regard for authority. He was shaping the sound, calling the shots, handing out unpaid invoices like it was part of the set list. Terry was the guy telling the drummer when he could breathe. And it's here he meets Walt Parazaider, who showed up with a sax and the eyes of a man who knew where to hide a body. And Danny Seraphine, who played the hell out of the drums. And the three of them, absolute chaos and denim. They hung out constantly, drank day-old gas station coffee, argued about jazz while stealing lighters, and practicing in garages so moldy they could have come with a CDC warning. And then the band pulls a merger move. We're combining with Little Artie and the Pharaohs, they said, because every great musical journey starts with a hostile takeover. Mike Sistak, the band's leader and guitar CEO, just shrugged and said, it was just business, which is what people say when they're lighting your future on fire but want to sound professional about it. So the trio walked, or really got pushed. But that failed merger was the best non-career move anybody ever made, because soon enough they'd link up with other sonic weirdos, and the band Chicago would slither out of the primordial ooze like a horned hydra powered by coke, ambition, and Terry Kath's refusal to play it safe. And this really was the musical equivalent of an underground explosion, and Terry was holding the match. So after the Jimmy Ford merger went about as well as a colonoscopy in an elevator, Terry Kath grabbed Walt and Danny and said, let's go make something loud, weird, and absolutely unemployable. So they jumped into another band, the Missing Links, which, if you're keeping score, is the third group in a row that sounds like a cover band or a failed mob front. They played clubs and ballrooms around Chicago, aka poorly lit caves where drunk uncles dance like mating birds and vomit on their own shoes. But it wasn't all despair. This is when Lee Lunane stumbled in, a trumpeter from DePaul University, who thought he was auditioning for a jazz recital and instead got handed a whiskey bottle and told to scream into a mic if the PA fails. And then came James Pankow, trombone, also from DePaul, possessed by the ghost of a Civil War bugler who OD'd on psychedelics. And then Robert Lamm, who played keys and sang like he had debt collectors pounding on his skull. And yes, Terry Kath, front and center, singing in a voice that dragged Ray Charles through a meat grinder. So all of them shoved into Parazaider's parents' basement, summoning unholy fusion while the laundry machine buzzed behind them. And they called themselves the Big Thing, most likely because the medium thing had too many letters to stencil onto their amp cases. But the world outside was melting. Sgt. Pepper had just turned music into performance art. The Vietnam War was chewing up a generation, and LSD was turning suburban teens into psychic squid people. Meanwhile, these guys were stuck playing top 40 covers for drunk guys who thought horns were only for polka. And Terry didn't take this well. One night, as a subtle middle finger, he wore his suit jacket backward. Not inside out, not bedazzled, backward. And then just to twist the knife a bit, they played the Mothers of Invention's How Could I Be Such a Fool at a club in Milwaukee. A bold choice, especially if your audience came to hear Sugar Sugar by the Archies. Needless to say, the club fired them immediately. Apparently, surrealist, horn-driven, weird jazz wasn't welcome during happy hour. But the rejection? That is what cracked the egg. That was a cosmic forehead smack that said, hey, maybe you're not cut out for this soul-sucking wedding band life. Maybe you should start a band that fuses rock and jazz and makes half of America uncomfortable. And so they did. Because if you're gonna fail, fail in stereo. Fail in brass. Fail while screaming your lungs out in front of 10,000 people who don't know what time signature they're dancing to. Enter Peter Cetera, the man with the voice of an angel trapped in a vat of maple syrup and the haircut of a guy who absolutely would cry during an episode of MASH. He was plucked from The Exceptions, which is either a band name or the title of a failed sitcom about jazz majors working at a diner. But with Peter on bass and vocal duties, the band was now complete. 7 guys, a dozen horns, exactly 0 plans to tone it down. So they ditched the Midwest and bolt to Los Angeles, where people eat quinoa and die spiritually at open mic nights. And there they inked a deal with Columbia Records and rebranded themselves as Chicago Transit Authority, which sounds less like a band and more like something that hits you with a $500 ticket for sneezing on the blue line. And then bam, 1969, they drop a double album debut. Not a tight little 9-track introduction, not a modest EP, no, a double album for a brand new band. That's like showing up to your first day of work with a flamethrower and a PowerPoint titled Why You Shouldn't Have Hired Me. It hit hard. People didn't know what the hell was going on, but they liked it. I'm a Man spread like musical herpes, unstoppable, sticky, and everywhere. The album was chaos in audio form. Jazz, blues, salsa, acid rock, pop, basically the ghost of Glenn Miller trapped in a wah-wah pedal. Critics called it a dizzying array of styles, which is code for I don't know what drugs I'm on, but my feet won't stop moving. And then there's Terry Kath. And if the rest of the band was the engine, he was the guy outside the car smashing the hood with a crowbar while screaming something about God and feedback. So he opened the whole thing with Introduction. Not a single, not a ballad. This was his, here's what I sound like before I get really weird. And then he did get really weird with freeform guitar. 7 minutes of what sounds like a Strat being exercised in an abandoned meat locker. One take, no overdubs. Just Terry, a Fender Dual Showman, a Bogan Challenger PA amp, whatever unholy spirit was trapped in his fingertips. The man used a radiator hose clamp to hold his guitar neck together. Who the hell even thinks of that? He also played acoustic on Beginnings, because sometimes you gotta gently strum a love song before setting fire to that speaker cabinet. This was less of a debut and more an ambush to hapless listeners everywhere. And Terry Kath was the guy holding the musical Molotov, smiling like he just taught a grizzly bear how to drum in 5/4 time. So you have this 7-headed sonic monster named Chicago Transit Authority who drops a double album and then immediately gets shoved onto the stage to open for Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. A lineup so potent it could legally cause pregnancy through FM radio. Now here's where it gets stupid in the best way. Walt Parazaider claims that Jimi Hendrix looked at him mid-wail, strat howling like it was being waterboarded, and said, "Your guitarist is better than I am." And we're talking the guy who played the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock, admitting that he just got sonically curb-stomped by a dude from Norwood Park with a radiator clamp holding his axe together. Danny, not to be outdone, remembered Hendrix and Mitch Mitchell saying Chicago was the best band I ever heard in my life, which makes you wonder if acid can actually develop Stockholm Syndrome. And Lee Lunane? He flat out confirmed what everybody already knew. Terry Kath was a musical leader. He wasn't just the front man, he was the cult leader, dragging jazz nerds and rock freaks into a brass-filled apocalypse they didn't even know they needed. And then right when things were getting good, the actual Chicago Transit Authority, people who run buses full of hungover commuters and forgotten umbrellas, said, "Hey, stop using your name or we'll sue your amps into oblivion." So the band dropped the Transit Authority and just became Chicago. Because apparently branding is less important than not getting sued by a bureaucratic bus cartel. And folks, thankfully, the city never found out, and we'll agree to keep this one among ourselves. But despite that, the debut album still slammed its way up to number 17, which for a double album from a brand new band with horns and acid damage is a damn miracle. Didn't hit number 1, but it definitely hit people in the teeth. And more importantly, it didn't stop. It crawled into speakers, nested in dorm rooms, and infected people's record collections like musical black mold. And then came Chicago 2 in January 1970. And this is where they went full on, you thought we were weird before? Watch this. 2 iconic tracks, 25 or 624, da-da-da-da-da, 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 da-da-da-da-da-da. Sounds like a riff that bench presses suburban dads. And Ballet for a Girl in Buchanan, a multi-part suite because apparently writing songs was for cowards. The whole thing opens with Make Me Smile, which is either about love or having a mental breakdown in D major. By now, Chicago wasn't just a band. They were a cult with sheet music led by guitar-shredding prophet who spoke in distortion and made Hendrix nod in reluctant awe. And this was only the beginning. So Robert Lamm writes 25 or 64, which is lyrically a discussion between 2 college-age people, one of them aware about everything going on in the world and the other one completely clueless. Terry Kath rolled into that track with what people now refer to as his hooligan guitar. If you're going to cut through a horn section, you better be bringing a serious set of gonads and your A game. And Terry brought both. And because of that, it turned out to be one of the best solos, energetic anthems out there. And the solo? Unwashed. Glorious. The wah-wah pedal on steroids. Like as if instead of running his guitar through it, he put the whole damn microphone that was miking the amp up through it. Thing peeled paint off of ceilings, dignity off grown men. And most likely lit the brightest bulb in Kirk Hammett's developing brain at the time. It wasn't just grimy, it was biohazardous. Meanwhile, 25 or 624 was the sweaty, amp-melting street fight of the album. The Ballet for a Girl in Buchanan was the prog rock opera, where everybody wore tux and screamed into the brass. Nearly 13 minutes long, split into 7 movements. Total musical fever dream performed by caffeinated math majors. Starts with Make Me Smile, which sounds wholesome until you realize it's just opening a ballet. Jimmy Pankow wrote the whole thing. Music, lyrics, probably peeled the onions that the onion skin they wrote the music on came from. And when it came time to find a lead singer, he looked around the room like a dad choosing who to throw the car keys to and landed on Terry Kath. And what did he say? Bingo! That's the voice. No hesitation. No vote. Just straight up divine intervention. And Lamm, the human thesaurus, calls Kath the white Ray Charles. And it was really due to the way he just phrased. Terry always sang like he saw the truth in a burning bush. Just the right vibe that they were going for. Both Make Me Smile and 25 or 624 got chopped into radio-friendly Franken edits, and somehow they still slapped. Make Me Smile hit top 10. 25 or 624 punched through the top 5 in the US and the UK, while flipping off Paul McCartney and asking Clapton if he wanted to borrow a backbone. And after all that, after melting every stage west of the Atlantic, Chicago finally hit the UK and felt like true artists. Which is what happens when you play brass-infused prog ballads in a land where people drink their beer warm and think that bassoons are sexy. This was the golden stretch. The moment before the ego wars and cocaine fogs, when the band still sounded like a revolution that didn't need a manifesto, just a horn section and Terry Kath's guitar chewing through the void. And Terry Kath certainly had a way of coercing notes out of that guitar, bending it to his will like a man winning an argument with a haunted vending machine. He beat that Strat to hell, and his gear begged for mercy, But that's what it took to wrestle the sounds out of the guitar that Terry was able to pull off. Yeah, he used the Fender Strat, same one that he used to unleash freeform guitar. And the liner notes for that one even bragged about it. Like, yeah, this song, that was one Strat, one amp, no overdubs, just trauma. That was only one of his many toys. He also wielded a Gibson Les Paul Professional, which we don't even see those anymore. Before that, he dabbled with register guitars because nothing screams legend and progress like starting out on a brand only 5 people and a dog have heard of. And both SG standard and custom models because the man had a harem of guitars and definitely was not monogamous about it. He favored light strings, so light in fact that he used a banjo string for the high E, which would be an 8-gauge string. And nowadays that's not an anomaly, but back in those days, people wondered how the hell he was squeezing such bends out of the thing in the high registers so effortlessly. Eventually he took a Fender Telecaster, ripped the neck pickup out, slapped in a Gibson humbucker and covered it in Pignose amp stickers, Mako motorcycle decal, and Chicago Blackhawks logo sticker. And Pignose, he didn't just use it, he invested in the company. Like, I don't want to just make this amp scream, I want to actually have part ownership in the screaming of itself. And his playing was insane. Wah-wah pedals, distortions, sustained notes, two-hand tapping before anybody even gave that technique a name. Eddie Van Halen would eventually get all the magazine covers for tapping, but Terry was out there in the 70s tapping like he was sending Morse code to Satan. Jimmy Pankow even said that Kath was making sounds that had no business coming out of a guitar and an amp in that era. Like he was channeling something from beyond, very much ahead of his time. And Terry didn't just shape Chicago's early sound, he punched it into the wall. Every song he touched made the band sound like they were halfway between a jazz festival and a barroom brawl. Led by a man who believed the only real note was the one that made your fillings rattle. By 1977, Chicago were an assembly line of vinyl-fueled freaks. 11 albums deep, most of them double albums. One of them a 4-record live album, Subtlety Be Damned. Their release schedule was like a faucet left on in the middle of a flood. By that point, Chicago was too in demand. They couldn't keep up. They were getting mobbed by their own success, and things were getting pretty wacky. In the US, there were gods. High chart positions, constant. Gold albums, used them as coasters. Their concerts, no advertising necessary. They'd announce a show and the garden would sell out faster than a priest at an orgy. And not just one kind of fan either. Everybody showed up. Hippies, businessmen, angry girlfriends, jazz purists, people who thought they were at a Knicks game. It didn't matter. They came. And they knew every word. But Europe was ghosting them like a one-night stand with Coyote Arm. Once beloved in France, by 1977, Chicago was just another name and an old playlist next to fondue recipes and existential dread. So what's the band to do? Well, they plan a comeback tour, ready to scream their brass-drenched gospel back in the Euro void like musical missionaries. And on that stage, night after night, there was one man at the center of the storm, Terry Kath, the hurricane with a Strat, the actual best soloist in the group, the one critics ignored while quietly sweating through their corduroy. During the shows, they'd open with Beginnings, lull the crowd into a warm buzz of nostalgia, toss out some Just You and Me, Color My World, and then bludgeon everybody into transcendence with 25 or 6-4. And live, Terry was not subtle. It was like he was possessed. His solos didn't build, they lunged at you. One minute you're swaying and then next you're gripping your seat, because Terry's guitar just entered this new dimension where physics doesn't apply and your soul owes rent. And yet somehow, he was still underestimated. Why? Because America's got a long history of pretending its best musicians are accidents. But in those live shows, night after night, Kath proved otherwise. He was the raw nerve of Chicago, the sonic engine belching smoke and melody, turning perfect albums into fire-breathing stage monsters. And by 77, they were not winding down. They were charging harder. The world couldn't keep up, Europe forgot them, the US demanded more, and Terry just kept laying into it harder. And by this time, Chicago wasn't just a band anymore, it was a corporation with a horn section. A hit machine in designer bell-bottoms, churning out smart music meant to reach every culture while still somehow being palatable to dudes named Carl and Pontiac Firebirds. Peter Cetera was out here talking about writing for the world like they're planning to soundtrack the next UN summit, because nothing says global unity like a bass solo and a 3-part trombone harmony. They even had their own fortress, Caribou Ranch up in Colorado. A private studio nestled in a frozen soundproof hellscape where creativity and cocaine had threesomes in the echo chamber. And it gave them control over their recording process, which is another way of saying nobody could stop them from making really expensive mistakes with synthesizers and cowboy hats. And Terry Kath was still experimenting. Gear, tones, his own nervous system. He had said that they're always tweaking recording techniques, which sounds wholesome until you realize they're also tweaking chemically. Chicago 11 was being built with unorthodox new techniques, a phrase that meant we mic'd the amp through a bong and used a dead raccoon as a drum muff. But beneath the creative noise was something darker. Terry was dying, not in the dramatic Jim Morrison kind of way, more in that slow, heartbreaking unraveling of a man who used to laugh too loud and now barely showed up. Seraphine said that during the 6th album, the coke use had already skyrocketed. That's album 6. By album 11, they were drawing chalk outlines around the mixing board. Lee Lunane dropped the kind of quote you only say when you've already lost somebody. He had said that Terry could handle more drugs than any human being I have ever met, and it was killing him. It's less bravado and more resignation. It's basically a man watching his friend walk into traffic and being completely helpless about it. And Kath wasn't hiding it. He was miserable, self-medicating with enough chemicals to embalm a rhino. Jimmy Pankow had said that he was really unhappy during this time. The Seraphine noted that the whole band was cracking. Chicago was still an amazing band, but it just wasn't a happy band. Because it's hard to smile when your friend's imploding in real time and the label still wants another hit by Tuesday. All that creative control didn't stop the pressure. The world didn't care if they were sad, it just wanted another Saturday in the park. But inside, that park was on fire. Terry was crumbling. And no amount of new mic techniques or Colorado air could stop what was coming. And Terry Kath died doing something that sounds like a cruel metaphor for the entire music industry. Playing with a gun at a kitchen table after 2 days of cocaine. By 78, Terry had stopped being a musician in a band and started becoming a bit of a haunted myth inside of one. He was still writing Mississippi Delta City blues, which had that greasy swagger that smelled like barbecue and bourbon, and taking it out on Uptown, which is pure snarling and rock aggression. But it turned out to be more of a warning sign. The solos were long, bitter, and furious. The rest of the band was leaning commercial, trying to fit more into the radio format. Terry, he wasn't having any of that crap. He was just wanting to burn it all down musically and keep that fire going. And then, of course, there were the guns. Terry collected firearms like a lot of musicians collect effects pedals. And according to Seraphine, drugs and guns don't mix, which is the kind of sentence that makes you wonder how many times people have had to learn that lesson. But Terry took those things everywhere, like his Lucky Charms, like they were keeping something worse away. And then came January 23rd, 1978, the night everything cracked for good. Canoga Park, California. Terry is at roadie Don Johnson's apartment, riding the tail end of a coke bender, sitting at the kitchen table, pulls out the 9mm semi and starts cleaning it. Don Johnson says, "Hey man, be careful. Because when someone starts waving a pistol around your butter knives, be careful is the closest you get to a prayer." And Kath, with the bravado of a man halfway to legend and halfway out the door, shows the clip. See? Empty. Like that's ever stopped a tragedy. Like fate gives a shit about clips. And then he does it. Puts the magazine back in, waving it around, and says the last sentence that anybody should ever have to say. What do you think I'm going to do? Blow my brains out? And then it happened. There happened to be one round left, and he didn't know. Didn't mean to. Just did. Like that. Gone. It was not him calling it quits on his own volition, not a cry for help or anything. It was the perfect storm of exhaustion, addiction, ego, and machinery. It was a musician so used to surviving chaos that he forgot chaos does not care. 31. A father, a genius, a mess, a man who could make a guitar cry and scream in the same bar of music, who could command a stadium and still die at the kitchen table in such a horrendous fashion. And when Terry Kath finally left the stage for good, it wasn't in front of screaming fans or beneath spotlight shimmer. Lee got the call, not a text or a press release, one of those calls that punches the air out of your lungs before you even hang up. And he drove out to that apartment, like maybe it wasn't true. Like maybe he'd get there and Terry would be laughing, playing freeform guitar with a cigarette jammed into his amp. But nope, just blood everywhere. Kind of scene that doesn't wash off. Not from the floor and not from your brain. Danny Seraphine, he got the news on his car phone. He drove straight to Don Johnson's place and found the roadie shattered. A broken man in the aftermath of someone else's final mistake. And he found Terry, still on the couch. Still there, lifeless, eyes open. The kind of image that lives in the corner of your eyelids for the rest of your life. And he helped the coroner out with the body because when your friend dies by accident and the band's falling apart, nobody knows what the hell just happened. You grab the damn stretcher. When they zipped up the bag, those size 12 snakeskin boots stuck out. Bag wasn't big enough. And then came the rumors. The done oneself in whispers. Hushed speculation. But everybody in the band, everybody said no. Not Terry. Never in that frame of mind to purposely do something so unthinkable. Jimmy Pankow didn't even entertain the thought, Because with Kath, he wasn't looking for an end. He was trying to survive in the only way he knew how, jamming, numbing, collecting those weapons like they were souvenirs from a war he never declared. And the drugs were always there. And then, of course, the worst part about it was that the night before he died, Terry sat up talking all night with a percussionist. Not sobbing or unraveling, just talking. Like maybe he still had time, still planning something. And he was, a solo album. James Guercio said that he was finishing it, still working and creating, still believing he had more to say. And there you have it, one of the greatest guitarists to ever live. Dead at 31, not from a car crash, or choosing to call it quits. Just a stupid, pointless, irreversible accident. A man who lit the stage on fire, snuffed out at a roadie's apartment with nothing but blood, regret, and boots too big for the bag. And the world didn't stop, but something in Chicago definitely did. They almost disbanded. Came that close. How do you go on when your anchor, your storm, your feedback summoning freak genius just did what he did after this bender in the kitchen? You don't replace that. You can't. Just learn to live with a Kath-shaped crater in the middle of every song. But they didn't stop because momentum is a hell of a drug, and so is grief. They just kept going, kept playing, kept cashing those checks. But the wildness, the soul-on-fire chaos that Terry dragged behind him, that was gone. And in 97, 2 decades later, they tried to give the man his due. The innovative guitar of Terry Kath, posthumous love letter, late and uneven, like most apologies from the living to the dead, tried to capture what Kath was, a noise prophet with no filter and too many strings. His daughter in 2016 dropped the documentary The Terry Kath Experience, or poetically Searching for Terry, because that's pretty much what everybody had been doing since 1978. Searching, those lost riffs, the footage, the dude behind the boots, and the truth behind the chaos. Joe Walsh called him a monster on guitar and a total experimenter. That's Walsh speak for the guy scared the living shit out of me with the Strat. And of course you had Hendrix's props that he was giving him. Terry Kath wasn't just underrated, that's too clean. That's something you say about your local taco shop. He was misunderstood, overlooked, outpaced by tragedy, and swallowed by timing. He was the soul of Chicago, that raw edge under the polish. And then suddenly he wasn't. Now he's legend. Now he's whispers and interviews and documentaries, and he's the guy with the broken Telecaster and 1,000 ghosts in his tone. Total myth, because we waited too damn long to make a memory. So to my subscribers, I just want to thank you so much. You're frigging awesome. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe yet, run that subscribe button through a wah-wah pedal, turn around and give the like button a nice spinning back kick, join the family. I want to thank you so much for watching.